Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Michael Zuber, One Rental at a Time, back with this Thursday expert, Mr. Jonathan Twomley. How you doing, sir?
I'm well. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing great. What I wanted to do here was talk about some structural changes that I'm seeing as potential for residential real estate, both owner-occupied and investors. And you really kind of sharing with you, have you ask questions, because I really haven't thought about them enough. And you asked deep, penetrating questions. Then maybe we can talk about the apartment sector as well. You ready?
Yep.
So the first one is, I think for the first time in 40 years, we've seen the bottom in rates, and rates are going to be hopefully gradually higher for probably years to come.
Yeah.
I believe consumers are predictable. They are going to make some interesting decisions. So for the last 40 years, there's been this first time home buyer, move up buyer, luxury market, right? The whole idea is, hey, we got a house. I'm just going to use round numbers. We bought our first home for 100. We've lived in it for 5 to 8 years. We've been promoted. We've got more kids. We want the better one. When they moved up, they made a little money on the first one. They bought the second one. The interest rate is lower 7 years later. So their payment shock is not very much, right? Because if they've had 5.5 and then they have 4 3/4, their payment maybe is up $20. But again, their wages are up. And then the same thing from move up to luxury. I believe in an interest rate environment that is up for years, meaning if you got a loan last year, it's 2.5, and then this year it's 3.5, and next year it's 4 1/4. I believe that's going to be enough of a payment shock to cause that progression to stop. And what you'll see is more and more people take their first home and upgrade it versus move up. And if that happens, transactions could fall off a cliff, and you may have a mixed problem, because a lot of builders only build luxury.
Right.
And if you don't have anybody kind of doing this, moving that pipeline, we could have a really messy market. Does that make logical sense?
Let me think. I guess it depends on how much, over time, people's earnings should go up.
True.
Also, right.
True.
And
True.
And we also have a wage inflationary cycle at the moment. So that's accelerating that wage growth.
Mm-hmm.
So people, and then there's also a certain amount of like having to move because you just need more space.
Sure.
That might dampen it a bit. I think there might also be, it could potentially accelerate the move from high housing cost states to low housing cost states.
Oh, good point.
For people to make that move because of the cost, right? So you might wind up, it could potentially sort of fuel the market further in some areas with out-of-state buyers,
Mm-hmm.
and really depress it in other areas where you have people trying to sell because they want to move to where it's cheaper, and then they can't because there's not somebody coming in behind them.
Right.
So it's hard to predict exactly
Sure.
what the effect of it would be. I think most likely it's never as bad as people assume it's going to be, right? Because people adjust, right?
Sure.
So they adjust to the new reality, and So I think that.
Okay, I like that. I like the migration choice.
I think it would dampen things for sure, but I don't think it would fall off a cliff. I think it would just change the nature of the market. Yeah. All
right. And I love that migration piece. You're right? Because again, you're in the Bay Area, you get your first 1950 built house for 1.5. The move up here is to 2 something. And that's just a big jump. You're like, you know what? Texas looks pretty good. And Arizona looks good. And yet California I think we've lost 1 million people over the last 2 years, people going to other states. So I think that's a very good answer, migration. The next one that we're seeing in residential is actually some of your big money guys. They are now going to builders like Lennar and Pulte and all of these guys and going, you know what? We want you to build a housing community for us. They're basically turning whole developments in what they're calling build for rent.
Yep.
And I see that picking up. I think they gave it a test run in 2020. It worked really well in 21. I think there's a bunch of people flying around right now going, we're going to build 400 there and 300 there. And because again, rents are skyrocketing. Everybody wants a home. So I see build for rent getting bigger this year, not smaller.
Yeah, I agree. And this is already been a really kind of under the radar growing thing for a number of years, but it seems to have kind of burst into public consciousness, or at least sort of investor public consciousness, right, in the last year. And I see that only accelerating.
Yeah, me too. All right. Another one I see is, I guess it's always been out there, but it's only hit my radar the last 3 or 4 years. And that is house hacking. This is the idea. Maybe you're buying a fourplex, you live in one, you rent out two, you get owner financing debt. You're not an investor, right? So they're very residential. Then there's a lot of 20 somethings now talking about having roommates, which is very common, right? But I see house hacking becoming a way more and more people get on the property ladder. As it kind of reaches mainstream, more and more people give it a shot. And again, if that's the case, I think that's net positive, but I think that's more demand.
Yeah, I agree too, because I think that's definitely a way to, I mean, look, it could actually be good for the house hackers, because if interest rates go up, it's going to make your payment more, less affordable, but then it'll filter through eventually to the price of housing.
Correct.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you might actually be, at some point be able to buy stuff more cheaply.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're bringing in roommates, or it's a 2-family, you're renting out the other unit, or a 3-family, you're renting out the other unit. I think it could really be good for you.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I find this whole idea, like the idea that house hacking is a new thing, is kind of funny, because in the Northeast, like that's never called it house hacking. But, for the last 100 years, people have been buying 2- and 3-family houses and living in one unit and having their tenants eventually paying for the whole thing. That was a very kind of standard way for people to build wealth, right? So it was only people who live in suburbs where they don't have multiple dwelling units. For them, it's like this kind of revelatory thing, but in the Northeast, this has always been a thing. So
very cool. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's the fastest way to build wealth. I mean, obviously, there's David Bach, I think his name is, and the Millionaire Next Door talk about, the latte factor and all of that. If you go after your biggest expense, which is housing for most people, and make that zero, or heaven forbid positive, it gets a lot easier to build wealth. So
just on that point, I mean, this is something I've talked about for a long time, but like for me, one of the reasons why you can see maybe people recognize it's a different background, because I'm upstate at our house, like our kids got quarantined, so we just popped up here. My career allows me to do pretty much whatever I want, whenever I want to. But the factor in that is that I always kept my cost structure low. I never wanted my housing cost to be something that I had to worry about. So I always made sure that the housing cost was really, really low. And that's really been the biggest factor in being able to do what I want, because I'm not nut, right? So I mean, I know it's hard to do, folks, because of where housing prices have gone, but living within your means is really the fastest way to get freedom.
Yeah. We got to bring the sexy back. Living below your means is it's a critical part of both our journeys. I would not be where I am today if I didn't do that for 10 or 12 years, pretty significantly. So very, very cool. I guess the last one we'll talk about is Airbnb.
Yeah.
I think Airbnb is going to have an interesting year. I'm actually seeing warning signs. And again, this is because I've been doing this forever. I actually talk at meetups, and I actually watch what the audience is excited about.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 years ago, it was syndication. Everybody I talked to was a new syndicator, never done a deal, but they were trying to borrow millions of dollars. And if you go to a Valley function, there's probably millions of dollars in the audience. So it was frightening to see. The last year or so, everybody's talking Airbnb arbitrage, right? Where they're basically releasing a property. I'm also seeing people down select, right? Airbnb is really cool when you have special properties and all of that. I'm seeing more and more Airbnbs and frankly C+ areas. And I'm like, the supply and demand's undefeated. So if everybody's talking about it, more supply is coming, and not going to end well. So I don't know if Airbnb hits your radar or not, but I see warning signs.
That's a good question. I mean, so you think, so the idea being what, this is just for 2021, not
2022
or 2022, irrespective of interest rates or anything. This is just just a thing.
It's just more investors are hearing easy money.
Yeah.
Even though it's not easy, they're hearing easy money. They can't afford the class A property. They're buying a B, and now people are buying C's. All that demand is going to show, or all the supply is going to show up. Airbnb prices are going to come down. You're going to have, oh, by the way, hotels will come back, right? Traveling will come back. People will go to hotels again. I don't know. I think it just makes me nervous anytime new investors hear easy or think easy. And I think Airbnb is easy today.
Yeah. And I think also, I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm always wary about the down market product in any market, right? For rentals, right?
Sure.
Just because if your market is, if you're aiming at the people who have the least money, right? They're the people who, when a recession hits, get whacked first, right?
Sure.
And so, your luxury renters or your luxury travelers, they're going to keep on traveling no matter what happens, right? Like, so that, and they're not, believe me, like people keep on making this argument to me like, oh, they're going to be nervous about the economy and they're going to want to get a cheaper place. No, it doesn't happen, right? And so it's only the cost conscious people who are going to go to a cheaper place. And the cost conscious people are precisely the people who are going to get hit in a kind of recession. So
yeah.
I'm always worried about that. Whether we have a recession, I'm not saying there's going to be a recession,
No.
but so when you get to saturation point and people are diving into those more marginal properties,
Be careful.
Be careful. Exactly. Yeah. And I do think that there is some, it's hard. I don't know what the saturation point is for Airbnbs, but it definitely is I mean, I look at sort of where I am now up in the Finger Lakes in New York State. And this is an area that has at best kind of flat population growth. And I think a lot of the houses that are being bought for vacation rentals, because it is a big vacation rental market. But at some point you hit kind of a saturation where you're going to just have too many rentals on the market. And then it's only going to be the really attractive ones that make money, right? So, and the other ones will get whacked, right? Because they're,
the market separates itself. This again, I have a saying, the supply and demand are undefeated, right? If the supply of like the lakefront or the special view, or they don't have to fight on price, but when you get to the marginal stuff, it's all about price.
Yep.
And that at some point becomes a losing.
Right. It's a commodity. If your property is a commodity property, or if it's a unique property, right? Unique properties, they're limited and they'll be fine. But when you get into the commodity properties, then that's when you gotta kind of be careful.
Very cool, Jonathan. It's been a wonderful 3 conversations today. How can people find you?
If you'd like to invest with me, go to Two Bridges Asset Management LLC. The quickest way to find it is just with Google, because the URL is too complicated for me to tell you. But just Google it, you'll find it, fill out my investor form. Or you can join my Facebook community, which is called the Multifamily Investment Community. Just search that on Facebook, answer the questions that pop up, and I'll let you in. And the last way is, if you'd like to get on my mailing list, you can get my free download, which is called How to Buy Your First 100+ Unit Property with Other People's Money and Get Paid to Do It. And you can get that at multifamilylaunchpad.org. And you can get the download and get on the mailing list. So those are the 3 ways to get in touch.
Very cool, Jonathan. This has been a wonderful week. Thank you for coming back every week. Is it still only 19 degrees or 13 degrees or wherever it is where you're at?
I will check and tell you. It is. Here you go. It is
12. It's 12.
It's 12. It's almost behind a cloud. Real feel. Look at the real feel. The real feel is 3 degrees.
Oh my God. I
love it. I know most people think I'm crazy, but
yeah,
I love it. So
that's nuts.
So I will see you next week, and
you got it.
Take care of yourself.
Thanks, Jonathan.